You've heard a lot today about how data has been collected, assimilated, a lot of maps hanging around, things of that nature. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the background drivers for that, how we've developed the data sets. We'll give you a little look at some of the products that have been developed from that, and I'm going to end by talking a little bit about how this information can be used by communities for economic planning and any other kind of planning going forward, and how we and the authority can help assist in those efforts. So with that said, Randy,
you want to do that? I want me to do it.
you just go ahead. It's not. Okay. So a little background on the authority. It's established by legislative order in 2006. It's a small group, 5-member board, 10-member advisory council, and 2 full-time and 1 part-time staff. None of them know much about the software that creates the mapping that we're talking about here today. So, pregnant pause just to get you choking there a second. And so that's as the need became apparent for developing mapping, that's really how Sewall came to be approached and involved in the project. I'm not going to read through every one of these 12 primary duties, but as part of their charter, they do have a list of 12 primary functions that are embedded in their objectives, long-term goals. And you'll see, if you read down through those, that some of those have to do with developing definitions for served and unserved areas, tracking both the needs and the approaches that the industry are doing to address those needs of the user communities within Maine, and guiding the development of infrastructure that addresses the gaps in last mile unserved areas and in those areas that are deemed as underserved as well. Thank you, Randy. So moving on to the 3rd slide. Some of the accomplishments that have been that we're aware of as part of the team members that have been realized over the last few years. Phil and his team have awarded nearly $6 million in grants, which have been matched by a similar amount from the private sector to develop 76 projects. That's an aggressive build-out of different gap points throughout the state. You heard a little bit in some of the earlier sessions today, the Shabik and so on, some of those projects. That's where some of these funds were approached. Recently here, related to some of the monies that have become available, they've worked with Maine Adult Education to develop the Community Connection, which is a program of 60 different location-based educational centers and courses to assist adults in realizing the benefits and learning the tools and techniques for taking advantage of broadband infrastructure throughout the state. As part of their mission, they've worked with us to develop the broadband availability maps, which are updated on a biannual basis, semi-annual basis, biannual basis, twice a year is what I'm trying to say, and have established an authoritative website for all things broadband with connection to resources and maps and so on. And what you're looking at here is that website, and some of the links that are there. If you want to go back to the PowerPoint, we'll get to that in a second. A little background on the broadband availability projects. The driver behind this at the national level was the Broadband Data Improvement Act. Which one of the mandates in there was to develop a nationwide inventory and map of broadband services. In 2009, Phil and his team were already looking at that need at the state level, and had actually issued an RFP for the development of that mapping data prior to the announcement of the State Broadband Initiative Program and the ARRA monies that would be available to help fund that mapping. And so, being the resourceful person that he is, he immediately went after those monies to assist in his program, and worked with us to marry in both the state's objectives and the national broadband map objectives into one project. They are the grantee, they are the awardee for that money, and so everything is funneled through Phil. He does have control over what's done with those monies and works with us very closely on defining those items. In addition to the mapping project, there's also money there for funding a strategic planning initiative project, and we're involved in that as well, along with a team of others made up of members of the University of Maine and a marketing group that works with us as well. Moving this in the wrong direction. Here we go. The projects are really designed to support the build-out of capacity, to track that build-out as change occurs, as new service providers either come into play, build out infrastructure, to provide, as you've seen with some of the maps today, provide that information for authority purposes, for other people's purposes as well upon request, and to support the other projects that are being funded by the grant that the authority has been awarded. Goals. Really, the statewide inventory was the primary goal short term. The long-term goal is to use that data in a multiple number of ways. There's a collaboration component to work with other agencies, other entities, businesses in the private sector. Both the mapping and the strategic plan project are really the marrying of those two things together are designed to assist the authority in establishing its vision for the future and setting some milestones for the development of broadband in the state. Part of our process here, there are almost as many data development processes as there are service providers involved. There is no one particular standard that the service providers are able to give us information in. We've received everything from hand-drawn maps on a napkin to digital data mapping, and all of our processes are designed to incorporate that into one geospatial inventory. That work is done using standard GIS technologies. The data is then easily transferable into the other systems that are being developed and generated from that, and you'll see a little bit about that here in just a little bit. As I mentioned, we do update the data twice a year, and that gets published both here at the state level and at the national level and incorporated into the national broadband map.
May I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
When you say it gets updated twice a year, exactly what is being updated twice a year?
What we get from the service providers is information that indicates where the areas are that they serve, and that's at a street level index, and we're going to show you a little bit about that in the maps here in a little bit. In addition to where, it's what technologies they use, what advertised speed of delivery, and so we use that to assimilate these maps and slice it into sections that represent basically these tiers that you've been hearing about, Tier 1 basic on up through. And those levels, the authority has defined their tier model to emulate the FCC's tier model for download and upload speeds.
And so you could, I'm just
Sure.
But in theory, it could be up to 5 months and 29 days behind what might be on the street level that came about 2 months ago. Is that
Depending on the time of year, yes. I mean, for instance, right now, if you look on the site, what you're seeing there is current as of data that was provided to us or modified up to November of last year, October, November of last year. And so the next update is actually due in May, is that correct?
April 1st.
April 1st.
Clarence, don't you, from the feedback we get from our map viewer, not the national map updates every 6 months period at the end.
Correct.
But our map, are we not updating the data based on feedback in between those 6-month updates to the feds?
The data is almost constantly being massaged because we take verification information that we're independently collecting. We take feedback data from different sources. There's a mechanism in here for an individual to actually provide feedback about on the map. It shows me as served here, but I really am not able to when I check with that provider. So we go through a process of verifying even that kind of information and use that to update our records. Now, when I say the maps are updated twice a year, what I'm talking about there is the actual publishing of that data, which is a different process. So at any point in time, the information that's available may be more current than what's processed on that map. Certain data sets we may publish a little more frequently or out of sync with that, particularly if they're a map that's been requested specifically, or if it's a data set that serves a specific purpose that needs to be done more frequently. But that's the general schedule that things are planned around. We mentioned the processes here for validation. Here's just an example of the things that we've done. One of the solutions that Phil and company have funded is we've got on our hosted site an actual speed test tool that is independent. It is designed not only to allow you as the consumer to hit that site and test your upload and download speed and see that feedback immediately, but we're collecting information while you're doing that about which service provider you're utilizing, and we actually can use this speed to then the speed information to help validate the information that they're giving us about their advertised speeds and how well that's aligning. So that data is collected in a database. Certain service providers are required to file information on forms to the FCC. We then get some of that information back, and we use that information for verification purposes. We've done some independent surveys. We've actually gone out in the field with laptops that have been enabled by the mobile service providers and tested the extents and upload and download speeds of their coverage. Literally thousands of points we've collected at this point to validate those ranges. And we, as we get new information about a build out on that system, we go out and test those new areas as well. Our core network that we're representing this against, and when I say network, I'm talking about a framework for the mapping information, is the E911 street database. And there's other information that we have been able to work with that team to utilize as far as house counts and things of that nature to help validate information as well. We mentioned the public feedback site, and there's even been at times we've used some third-party data sets. There's a lot of work going on around that. One of our specialty data sets is an item that's referred to as a community anchor institution layer. It is several thousand locations representing things like schools and hospitals, medical facilities, universities, other key facilities inside the different communities, and not only where they are, but we've contacted those facilities and garnered as much information as we could about who they're working with as a service provider, what kind of services they're consuming, and even a little bit of feedback on their needs as part of what we did at the needs assessment. I'm going to have Randy bring up the map gallery here just to show you a little bit of how interactive that is. This is a site that we helped build for the authority. It's linked to their webpage. It is designed to be a user-friendly environment. It's organized, or attempted to be organized anyway, so we'll let the user actually ultimately decide for themselves, but we believe it's organized in a way that's very logical. There's different categories of maps there. These are static PDF maps, and when I say static, it means that they're not searchable, but these particular maps we are processing out of the GIS data layers, and they are produced in a PDF format, which makes them very compatible to almost any user out there. They load very simply in just the standard Adobe Reader. They range in size depending on the area of coverage, but the town maps, which is an example you're looking at here right now, this is about an 85 kilobyte file, not very large at all, so it downloads very quickly. The advantage of this is, one of the advantages of this format is it's a way to present some mapping control without the user actually having to be a mapping educated individual from a software perspective. So you have some control over the different layers and visibility, and you can turn layers off and on and zoom in and do a little research from that perspective on a visual basis. One of the other maps that has been produced by the authority, and this is in concert with ourselves and our team partner at the Maine Office of GIS, is this searchable engine that's up at the moment. Now, where the static maps were not searchable, that's the whole idea of this map. And you can query by an address. It will then return results on that information relative to what kind of service is available and who those service providers are who you might work with or contact to acquire service at that location. And do you want to run it quick?
Yeah, does anybody have an address that they want to find here?
Any particular interest in a certain location, anybody? Yes. The question was in the federal program, it's designed for larger service providers, and larger may not be the right term to use, but it's a favorite of the cable providers and some of the larger landline providers. They have the opportunity to provide data according to that statute at what's called the census block level, which in that definition, it's as long as that area, it's a population definition area, census information area, as long as that's 2 square miles or less, they can report at that stage. So the question was, is there any plans to get that information at a more granular level, down to the street level? The answer to that question is actually yes, that's going on now already. We, as part of our process, even when a service provider gives us a census block submission, we aggregate that downward to the street level involved in those particular locations, and then provide that feedback to that service provider and verify with them that representation of all streets within that area is truly correct. I mean, one of the things you heard about earlier today, and I know, Susan, you know this as being a service provider, I mean, it's a lot of the build-out is determined based on density of customers on a given street segment. And so It's not necessarily a truism that just because an area measures 2 square miles or less, that all streets in that area have the kind of density that a service provider wants to run infrastructure down that street. So I see a follow-up question. So the question was if there is a false positive reported in an area, summarizing what Susan said, is there a mechanism for collecting that information or having the service provider feed that information back to us? And the answer to that is yes, there's actually 2 processes that can be utilized there. One is for that provider to work with us directly on that information that they've gathered, and we have all that contact information. The other is actually through the website itself, and there is a link there to a correction form. And so be that an individual within the community or one of the service provider teams, they can use that form to feed that information back in, and we collect that information as part of our verification process and use that to update the map. Yes, Lisa.
I can see where we might have to take a closer look at this process, because from what I've heard you speak to me before about, the providers are getting a lot of feedback, but we're not, the people aren't coming and filling out the form so much, so.
And
Think on this a little bit.
The customer may call in,
Yeah.
and we as a service provider, I can implement that in tomorrow. But the consumer, once they get that list of ISPs to call, and if they're told no, there's no service, they don't go back, and you're not getting the feedback.
So the comment for the folks in the audience is that that feedback, right now it seems like the process is depending upon the individual consumer to feed that information back in, and that's a valid point. I'm not sure that the service providers have deployed the mechanisms that are intended for them to take that information, that feedback, and use that coming back. Now, one of the shortcomings in their process, every organization is a little different, but I can envision where that contact is coming through a representative of the company who may not even be aware that this program exists, and that there is a mechanism to feed that back in. So it is a process point that the team should probably take a look at and try to work with the service providers to make sure that's getting back to us.
Well, one thing I wanted to point out, is that mic on? Huh? It's on? Is if you look here, one of our verification steps is actually the first one listed here. After every round of when a provider gives us data and we map it, we send them back maps saying, here's how we've interpreted or how we've applied or mapped your data. Please verify that this is accurate. Please send us any changes or whatever. So there is a process there. We have seen though that some of the providers are slow to adopt this. They're under resource crunches, a lot of them, and everything. So, but this is a process that we need to probably push a little harder in getting them to focus on. Here's how this data is being mapped. Is it right? Is it accurate? And send us any changes. So, in the future, we're going to try to be a little more involved, I think, with the providers in this process.
Any more questions about the maps themselves and the mapping part of the project? Okay, I'm going to move on a little bit. We can come back anytime anybody thinks of something. Mention the other side of our projects with the authority, and that's this project we refer to as the planning project. It's more formally understood to be the strategic planning project, and This has gone through 2 stages at this point. The first part of this effort was really about establishing a baseline, some metrics that could be used to measure change in progress as things go forward. The mapping is a piece of that, but the other things are not necessarily infrastructure centric, and that's having to do with use, adoption of use, and what are some of the barriers to that adoption by people, even if it's available to them, they're not necessarily always taking it. One of the statistics that has been shared is that we rank, as a rural state, we rank very high in terms of the number of small businesses, the disbursement of our population. We've got actually very broad Tier 1 coverage at this point at 90% or better representation, according to the data that's been provided. Basic DSL speed tier kind of coverage. But even with that, the adoption rate is running at about 52 to 55%, maybe slightly higher. And that's a little less than even the national average. So this project was about researching some of those needs, what's not being addressed, what are some of the barriers to development and adoption. And that needs assessment was released in June of last year. There were 6 public forums. There were 20,000 total surveys between the 2 rounds of surveys that we sent out. We got from a surveying perspective, we got a very high percentage of those back, in better than 10% and almost 15% of the surveys that were sent out. There were nearly 600 businesses who participated. We did some community research. As I mentioned before, we made contact with a very large percentage of the community anchor institutes, looked at some special interest categories such as Native Indian tribes, state agencies, and other groups from that perspective. All of this was wrapped into a detailed report which is available off the ConnectME website, which is the needs assessment portion of this effort. Some interesting things that came out of that is there's some unique challenges to Maine. There's some things that are very common to Maine and other rural states, but as you can see here, I mentioned that we rank fairly low in terms of the speeds that's available. We're 43rd out of 50 states. The deployment of broadband, I think we've actually probably come up from 45th, but that was the last federal survey prior to the needs assessment. And we rank 41st in the number of IT professionals in non-IT industries, and 35th in high-tech jobs. One of the interesting things that we got from the service providers when we interacted with them on this was some discussion about the cost of running their businesses and how one of the handicaps, and there's other data to back this up as well, has been the lack of a level 1 carrier with more direct access to the World Wide Web backbone. Maine is basically on the information highway. We're a cul-de-sac. And information really has to go south in order to get out. The broadband routes go around us at this point to the rest of the world. And so things like the Maine fiber projects, the 3-ring binder, and all those other projects that are going on, those are improving the scenario, but still the costs are impacted by the need to route data further away than other states have the opportunity to access. Yes?
Are we any more strategically placed if you look at us geographically in relationship to Canada?
Well, there's no question that we border more Canadian provinces than we do American states, and so that's part of the problem. We're very rural. Another factor. I mean, we are it's debatable whether we're the first or second, but we're right there in terms of our rural population to the size of the state and how it's dispersed. There's been some discussion about the benefits that we would recognize if we had a more direct through route that actually connected our infrastructure with the Canadian infrastructure. And there's a lot of planning going around how that might be accomplished and what the benefits would be, and what the drivers and return on that investment might be to do that. We found that in households and businesses for some extent, but these are some of the factors that would affect the increase of broadband use. And the number of people involved, the age and demographics, school-age children are a big driver for the want for internet access, high-speed internet access, education purposes. Small businesses would find benefit in terms of their financial situation. Access to workforce, if you've got high-speed internet connectivity, then that geography differential is not as big a factor as it might be otherwise. Where truly business-grade high-speed internet is available, or even some mid-grade business speed, you find that there's a real increase in rural population that's being employed by urban businesses even. So it's not necessarily that the opportunities are all based on the business having to be here in order to take advantage of that opportunity, but there's a lot to say about that as well. One of the things that was really interesting about the needs survey was that one of the big common driving factors that came out of the surveys and the meetings is that there's a large percentage of the non-adopters who say their biggest reason for not adopting is there's no perceived value there. Now, I read that a couple of different ways. There's truly those people that no matter what was available, what speed it is, what the cost is, they may never take advantage of it, may never use it. But I think from the data, there's also a component who gave that response that we're really trying to communicate that for the money that it costs them, it doesn't fit into their budget constraints, and that's what they meant by perceived value. So there's two ways to read that response. Both are important factors.
I'm familiar with having to choose between internet and cable television, and I imagine there are other people in that situation. Pick one or the other, and most people are probably going to pick the
I would agree. And the so bundling of services, that's affected take rates. I think it's why you see some more companies trying to go in that direction. But it's really not always an either or kind of scenario. Sometimes it's a choice between internet and food. So we've got a very high part of the population who actually are in the $15,000 income category. So that's putting you in a situation where you got to make some serious choices. So again, those point to how economic drivers are really a big piece of this, and the increase of broadband availability could actually tip that scale in the other direction for those people in that situation.
I always get a kick out of the fact that for a lot of people these days, they're paying $100 for the phone, $100 for their cell phone, $100 for their internet or their cable. Those things all used to be free. That's like $300 worth of monthly expenses that we didn't used to have to pay for. And I think it's a big number.
Yeah, yeah. So coming out of the needs assessment, the goal, the short-term goal of that at this point is to fold that information into the formation of a strategic plan. That's currently in the final stages of review and adoption. There is a need there to align some of that plan along with the National Broadband Plan, but it's not a one-for-one kind of scenario. Maine has differences, and so this plan is also looking at those differences. And so we're looking at emphasizing those differences as part of that plan, and we're at the stage right now where there's been some preliminary recommendations made. There's been some public comment brought back by service providers and others, and the ConnectME Authority itself is in the final review stages at this point. We anticipate that rolling out here in the next month or so. Cross our fingers, Phil says. Some basic items out of that recommendation. There's a need we see to increase public awareness of broadband, not necessarily public awareness about it's out there, but about the ways that it's being made available, the applications that can be supported by it that some people may not be aware, things of that nature. Education programs connected in. From the federal perspective, one of their real standards here for showing a return on the investment of the ARRA dollars is closing the gaps in terms of unserved areas, addressing underserved needs, and ultimately measuring success by an increase in the take rate or the subscription rate of the system. There are recommendations in there for supporting programs like Dawn's on the healthcare initiatives and telemedicine, supporting education initiatives, and other efforts as well. And this is a continuation of that public-private partnership that the authority is really set up to be. So I mentioned earlier that the data as it sits right now, I mean, we're in a state where we're in the process more of change detection at this point on the mapping information rather than the initial creation of it in most instances. So it's really at a stage now where we can start to think about how this information can be used for other purposes other than just making these maps that you see around, the red-green maps, and showing that kind of change. And we've been approached recently by some entities thinking along this line as well, and it's really in that area of economic development that I see this information being able to be leveraged for that purpose. When you think about how businesses are going to choose a location, along with those things that have historically been there, the cost to locate, the cost to develop a site, where am I going to place my business? Where I'm going to place it more and more is going to be dependent on not only my access to customers locally and local transportation concerns, but what kind of access I have to a global market. That's becoming more and more the need, and that changes that geography picture, makes it less of a separation and more of a joining if high-speed broadband is available at business grade. So this really is a critical infrastructure item at this point, in much the same way that water, electricity, sewer has been. And being able to get your data through that system, get your information through that system, interact with your customers through that system, it's as important to those economic drivers as if the sewer suddenly stopped working or I can't get water. And if you think about it in those perspectives, these all come together to affect the quality of life that we're talking about here. And the economy is a big piece of that. So, that's really the next step. There's things about the information that's being collected that are under the guise of NDAs that we're not able to necessarily divulge directly, things about technology uses on particular service providers, things of that nature. But in general, what speeds are available in an area, we can sanitize the information to a point where we can work with communities to do those evaluation assessments or to help present the data in a way that can be used for that purpose. And that's where I see things going here in the near future. That's pretty much what I had. Any other questions? Not too bad, though. All right, thank you. Thank you for sticking around. I know being at the end of the day, with the weather and everything, I appreciate your time.